we had 2 tier 1 coaches, Kirby Smart and Dabo Swinney. And Stu probably spit out his Cheerios when he saw Dabo Swinney up there, but he guys won 2 national titles. And even if he's fallen off a little since NIL because he doesn't embrace the transfer portal, he still, has quite a history. And it's not like he's fallen off and gone 6-6.
Is it possible to start the chunk of coaches with tier 3, put Kirby in his own tier, Dabo in his own tier, because you are walking around the recruiting trail with 2 rings, and then start?
I could see that rationale. The tricky part on this is I feel like some of the tier 2 guys are very close to Dabo at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the guys I was pretty passionate about, pushing up on this list was Lance Leipold.
Yeah.
He did an amazing job at Buffalo. He won a bunch of national titles at the D3 level, and he's worked miracles at Kansas,
Mm-hmm.
So I'd make a strong case for him to be there. Kalen DeBoer was amazing job. Another guy similar to Leipold, where he had a lot of success at off the radar as a head coach. And then he goes to a program. Now, Washington, was down. It wasn't like abysmal like Kansas was, but, he got them to the national title game with largely the exact same roster, save for the quarterback who he coached at Indiana when he was an offensive coordinator, so those guys are I feel like right on Dabo's heels, but then you get into like, there's a cluster of like 3 guys. They all have some overlap in Ryan Day, Lincoln Riley, and Brian Kelly from, in their own unique ways where they've been really successful. And especially in the case of, Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley, they've taken over blue-blooded jobs and have won a lot of games, especially Ryan. But at the same point, you got to crack through that next ceiling.
Talking through the tier 2 guys, it's an interesting conversation because you look at most of the list. Kyle Whittingham has built and done some amazing things at Utah. Lincoln Riley, fixes Oklahoma's offense and has been disappointing, but still has improved USC. Mike Norvell gets Kansas State to the playoff. We mentioned Lance Leipold, who dug Kansas out of this huge hole. Brian Kelly, obviously very accomplished at Notre Dame, wins the SEC West in his first year at LSU, wins a Heisman last year. Luke Fickell, fixes the situation at Cincinnati, gets them into the playoff. Kalen DeBoer fixes Washington. Ryan Day, though, is a complicated figure in terms of assessing how he coaches. On the one hand, you do have the overall record, which is like what 44-4 at this point. It's pretty impressive.
I mean, it's stacked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he inherits a good situation. The program seems to have backslid. Where do you stand on Ryan Day, and how much conversation was there about his place, and how do you square, the overall record and winning games and taking care of business and avoiding some of the eye-popping upsets that kind of marred the Urban tenure, and sort of recognizing that he's fallen short of where Ohio State's standards are for this program?
Yeah, I think Ryan Day is a really unique situation, and like the only one who has some similarity is Lincoln Riley in that they were offensive coordinators and elevated to a really successful program. And what they were able to do was keep some of the best parts of the old regime. In Ryan Day's case, he kept Mickey Marotti, the strength coach, kept Larry Johnson, the line coach, Mark Pantoni, who ran the recruiting office. So there was a lot of, key things he kept in place. Now, like what you said, he has, like, Ohio State has not stubbed its toe like, Ohio State did before him. Urban, he had a bad loss to Purdue, a bad loss to Iowa. There would be those times where it was that. Whereas Ryan Day hasn't really lost any of those kinds of games, but he's lost to Michigan, and he's lost 3 times in a row. And that's really the gut punch, but his record, he is 39-3 in the Big Ten and 56-8 overall. That's a staggering record right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you can deny that. I mean, he's beaten a lot of good teams. And by the way, one of those years he lost to Michigan, he came within basically a missed field goal of winning a national title. They were leading Georgia by 2 touchdowns going into the final quarter. And then Marvin Harrison Jr., gets knocked out of the game. And then it comes down to a field goal. Their kicker misses it. If not, they play TCU. And I don't think anybody outside of probably Fort Worth thinks they would have lost to the Horned Frogs. So I think he is I think he has honestly a stronger case to be in that second tier than a bunch of other guys,
Mm-hmm.
based off of that. But I get it. It's a there's a lot of pressure on them now. They've gone heavy into NIL as they probably should have, but losing to Michigan, kind of pushed them into that area. But this is I think you said it at the start of this. There's going to be a bunch of, this is going to be like on a pivotal year for a handful of coaches. And I think Ryan Day is at the top of the list. I don't,
Yeah.
short of the national title, if they beat Michigan this year, which I think they will, if they lose to Georgia in the national title game, I don't think it's like, not like his job is in jeopardy, but I just think that like, that's going to be, maybe not a successful season. Whereas almost anybody else to get to the national title game, unless you're Ryan Day, is probably going to would be a big success.
The what if questions. I mean, among recent college football what ifs, if that Ohio State kick goes in, the narratives and landscape of college football would be very, very interesting in terms of Kirby Smart, Ryan Day, Jim Harbaugh, Michigan. All of these things would be pretty interesting. Before people get super angry at you, and I'm sure plenty of folks already are with the coaching tiers, what is you guys' methodology? Because sorting coaches into tiers is a complicated process. Obviously, there's a lot of things to consider, a lot of assessments and check marks, and a coach's job is a lot of different things: talent development, talent acquisition, game management, all those things. What is your methodology for sorting the coaches into tiers?
I think Vanini and I probably have somewhat different rationale. Like, well, he'll be, here's what I'm thinking, and then I'll take issue with some of them based off of what I'm thinking, and we'll kind of hopefully meet somewhere in the middle. I don't know if we always do, but I think that's kind of the fun part of it. I don't think we're like way off on anything. There's like, you can probably count on two hands how many coaches we disagree on, with some venom in it. Like there's a few where I'm like, yeah, you're right. That guy should be, we kind of come into this land in the same place. But I think by and large, our rationale is more similar than Stu and I when we have our dueling top 25. I've joked Stu has like the attention span of a house cat. If something happened like 2 years ago, he doesn't think it happened. He doesn't credit it. And whereas, Vanini is much more, gives credit to what happened. I was like, these guys didn't just forget how to coach football, whereas I feel like Stu is much more reactionary with things than I am. And so, look, I still give James Franklin credit on his resume for doing what he did at Vanderbilt, getting them into the top 25 in 2 or 3 years, because they were horrific before he was there. And they've been horrific after he left. The only time they've actually been good was when he was the coach there for 3 years. And I just don't think you just kind of like, oh, it was like a different guy because he's struggled. He hasn't beaten Ohio State in whatever it is, 6 years. I don't think you just completely, I mean, it's Ohio State. Almost nobody's beating them. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's no easy answers to these things. A lot of people will point out and go, oh, so-and-so is a terrible game coach. It's like, yeah, you remember anecdotally this or that, but there's a bunch of really, Kirby Smart, he's the clear number one on our list. He's had some bad game coach moments in his history too. And a lot of people will say, he's playing with way better players than everybody else or than most teams he's facing. But, to his credit, he's acquired them and he's helped develop them, and so I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Two guys that I think I would have pushed to maybe move up, and maybe I'm biased because the way that you guys order them in the tiers maybe a little bit. And I think one thing that makes it difficult with the tiers is assessing where is that coach and what is that program ceiling and how do those two things interact. But for me, the consistency that Mike Gundy has had at Oklahoma State and the consistency that Mark Stoops has had at Kentucky, I think those are two guys that when people talk about like the best coaches in the sport, don't probably get the love that they should. You look at what Mike Gundy has done. Obviously, he had the peaking years in 10 and 11 where they won the Big 12, and even still, falling back a few years, 7-6 2 years ago, but they win 10 games last year in a year that a lot of people had really modest expectations for them. We'll see about them this year. Am I making a strong case for Gundy or Mark Stoops to be included? I think people underrate how difficult it is to win at Kentucky for a number of reasons. I think them recruiting in Ohio, being able to win and doing so, and shifting his staff as much as he did. How much do you factor in the quality of the programs themselves?
A lot. I mean, look, I would also factor in, in Stoops' case, he's at Kentucky and he's not the basketball coach. He's the football coach. It's
Mm-hmm.
way harder to win there. And, at one point, I forgot, like, I don't have this stat off the top of my head, but like he's had 2 double-digit win seasons recently, whereas they had like, in the previous 50 years, maybe one. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like, I know they play more games now than they did 40 years ago, but he's been able to do some things that nobody is able to sustain at Kentucky. I think the challenge is like, I start looking around who's a tier 3 coach. And I think you could probably argue, Luke Fickell, did really well at Cincinnati. It's too soon to tell what he's doing at Wisconsin. I think he'll get it going there. But like
Mm-hmm.
some of the other guys, I feel like they've just either won at a higher level. Comparing Ryan Day, Brian Kelly, and Lincoln Riley to those guys, I think is tough just because
Mm-hmm.
they're at really blue blood schools. Now, Oklahoma State, I would make the case, and you've been there too. In the Big 12, they have some of the best facilities in the Big 12. It's like
Mm-hmm.
eating,
Especially
now with Oklahoma and Texas out. You look at the other schools, I mean, they're competing with, now Texas Tech has upgraded their facilities recently, but like some of these other schools, it's not like they're anything close to it's Iowa State, it's the Kansas schools, it's TCU, which, only recently became like a Power 5 kind of program. So they're in there with programs that like, it's not the same to me. It's not like they're in the SEC and they're really punching up all the time. But he's, Gundy's had a long-term sustained success, and he's another one that's like tough to, he has 2 really good years and then 1 year that's not so good. But again, he's at a place where he's not at Oklahoma. Um, I think when I go through this, I'm basically, trying to look for a like coach, and the like coach in this case is Kyle Whittingham. And to me, I would put Kyle Whittingham just a slight notch above him.
Mm-hmm. Whether getting texts, getting calls, comments, Twitter, whatever, who have you seen the most pushback on where you have him placed in the tier system?
This year it's too soon to tell, I'll be honest. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's been a time or two you get like a thanks man comment, like, it's like said with disdain.
You got to wait till they get an upset or pull an upset or get upset in week 1 before people really want to start throwing rocks.
Yeah, we had this, we worked on this last week, but it, kept on working on it through the weekend. I mean, I wouldn't have bumped Mike Norvell. Like we bumped him up a spot this year. I wouldn't like overreact to one, to a loss to Georgia Tech. I feel a little bit better about like our comments on Brent Key. Again, it's early with him, but I think he's had a really nice start. He's doing well in recruiting, by all accounts. And I think we probably had him higher than I think most people would have like expected him to be. Remember, he wasn't the favorite to get the job when he got the interim tag. So, these things are, as they say, very, very fluid.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, are you worried at all about getting blackballed from a Colorado press conference for having Deion in tier 6?
I hadn't really thought about that. And let's be honest, I don't, like, it's not like I'm going to press conferences either. I hadn't thought of that. Everything is such like a microwave thing. I watched some clip. I don't know if it was yesterday it went up or Saturday about a local reporter had asked Deion something. And I was just like, I listened to the response. It was like 2 minutes. And I'm like, I'm not really sure how to feel on this in terms of the way the question was brought up. And then I listened to Deion's answer, and Deion, the way I interpreted the answer was like, hey, this is what drives me. This is what, and again, Deion Sanders is one of the greatest football players in the history of the sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when he's talking up there, I'm sitting there thinking, Yeah, of course, I get why Dion, would be dismissive of anybody who's like, who is either questioning him, literally questioning him in a lot of ways, just because you don't know what it took to do what I've done. You haven't seen what I've done. I get that. I think the parts that are kind of more into a gray area are Dion's not wired like most of the people who play college football. It's they probably have different motivations. They probably have a focus that's not the same. They probably don't have the same work ethic. There's just a lot of different parts of it. But I think it's like, I'm like, I've been around him enough in bigger settings to listen and go like, yeah, I kind of now get what he's talking about. But at the same time, I think it's such a unique, and you've been around this way more than me. It's such a unique media like ecosystem there. I don't think there's anything quite like it, because you don't have anybody in terms of the level of celebrity as a coach, in terms of the level of success that they've had. Like all these guys to some degree were like a star at some point, but they were not Deion Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what comes with that is really fascinating, just if you take like two steps out of it. But man, you can't look away from any of this.
Mm-hmm.
It's just very interesting on all sorts of levels.
You guys don't include first year FBS coaches, so we'll leave them out of it. But when you look at guys who you think have a season ahead where they might be moving up a tier, or you could see a breakout season for them coming on, anybody jump out to you on guys that are moving up?
Yeah, there's a few. Like, look, I think John Summerall is one of the best coaches that's become a head coach in like the last 5 years. What he did at Troy
Yeah.
was fantastic. I think he will do really well at Tulane. I think he's one of those guys. Um, you know, I think there's a batch like Brent Key was somebody where you're kind of like, okay, this is going to be interesting, because like they've changed a culture of how that place is, and I just think it's a little different from Jeff Collins in terms of like, I don't want to say style versus substance, but it does feel a little in those lines. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I would say Mike Elko has a chance to really spring up. He did a really good job in his first couple of years there. I also think the one that I think is a really good coach, and to me, this is a year where people I think are going to like, oh yeah, that guy is a really good coach. Is Matt Rule? I mean, his
I
first
was
two
going to bring him up.
spots. What's that?
I was going to bring him up. Yeah.
Yeah, no, his first two spots, he was really rough year at Temple, really rough year at Baylor. And David, you and I both covered Baylor down there. Like he took over an awful situation. It was toxic
Yeah.
in Waco. And I thought he did an amazing job, not just on the field, but optics of how he answered questions and everything. And I have a ton of respect for him as a coach and as a leader in that capacity. They struggled last year. Yeah, obviously, no secret, didn't make a bowl game. They haven't been to a bowl game in a long time. The previous two times he got his team after a really dismal first year into a bowl game year two. I think he's going to do that this year with Nebraska. Schedule is favorable. I can see them maybe winning 8 games. And I think he will be a guy who we will be moving up at least a tier or two after this year.
I think so. I'm really intrigued. I'm going to see them week 2 when they play Colorado. I think you guys undersold what he did at Temple and what he did at Baylor, getting them from where that program was to the Sugar Bowl, and that's pretty incredible. I do think another guy that jumps out to me, Alex Golish,
Mm-hmm.
young coach. Hasn't really done a whole lot. Last year was his first year as a head coach at USF. They got some pieces to really they're going to score a bunch of points this year. They bring back a ton on offense, but I think he is a guy that the more he's in the spotlight, and the more teams play, the more people watch his teams. I think he's a guy that is going to be a big time head coach very, very soon.
Was it you? It was like, so I'm with you on that. Like I had 4
Mhm.
guys who I'm trying to think if they were tier 4 guys, tier 5 guys. They were tier 5 guys. I had 4 of them who I think will move up at least one spot next year. Alex Golish, Ryan Silverfield, GJ Kinney,
Mhm.
Barry Odom. I want to say somebody in our fantasy draft took Byron Brown. whoever that was, I was like, he's not going to win the Heisman, but he will put up big numbers in that system. He's really
Yeah.
talented. It wouldn't shock me if he ended up finishing like sixth.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. I mean, they got a bunch of dudes, and they're going to be a fun team to watch in the G5. I mean, all the attention obviously on Boise and Memphis, and you see some Fresno love out there, and obviously people want to yell about Liberty. But I'm with you. I think Texas State with GJ Kinney and USF with Alex Golesh, you want to see some points. They're going to put them up. They're two of probably the most fun teams. Like if they're on, I want to watch them. So I'm
Were
looking
you
forward to it.
like, I know you were a Mizzou guy. Like you didn't
Mhm.
overlap with Barry Odom, did you at all?
No, I mean I know him a little bit, but no, I've I think I had moved. I was covering Tennessee, I think, when
Okay.
he was at Missouri. But yeah, I know him a little bit, but not a ton. I think he's making the most of his second opportunity, and I still think Bobby Petrino leaving them in the cold and him bringing in Brendan Marion was pretty unbelievable,
Yes.
and I think it definitely improved their outlook a season ago, and they were shocked to be able to keep him for a second year in Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, look, that was the best year UNLV's had in like 40 years. He has
Mm-hmm.
two young coordinators, one on each side of the ball. Like I agree, Brennan was pretty marketable, and there were some head coaching jobs. I think he sniffed around a little bit. They lose their starting quarterback who transfers to USC. I know they have a really big time receiver in Ricky White. I think that
Yep.
they get Boise at home. I don't, again, I don't know if they're going to be the team that comes out of the group of five, but I've known him for a long time, dating back to his GA days, 25 years ago. He's a guy who I think has really learned after his first go around as a head coach and made some really smart and thoughtful adjustments to how he runs a program. And I could see him winning 10 games this year, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden be a fairly hot commodity again.
Yeah.
What comes open.